Hello, great biology students. Welcome to our biology class. This week in our biology class, we'll be looking at the topic, the skin. Looking at the skin as a homeostatic organ, we have the following learning objectives. That at the end of this lesson, you should be able to draw and label the main structures of the skin. You will also state and explain at least 5 functions of the skin. Make sure that at the end of this lesson, you'll be able to achieve this stated objective. Now, the skin is the outer layer to most animals. When we say that, is the outer covering of many animals, typically vertebrates. Because when we talk about vertebrate, we can possibly see two major types of skin there, where we see the naked skin and the covered skin. When we talk about the naked skin, we see that in amphibians. When we talk about the covered skin, we've seen that in reptiles and fishes, that their skins are being covered with scales. If you move into the bird, you see that their skin are also covered with feathers. Come into mammals, you see that there are also a set of vertebrates that have skin covered with hairs. So the skin stands to be the largest organ of the body. When we talk about the body of mammals, skin tends to be the largest organ, and not just the largest organ. Skin is also the toughest tissue in the body. Looking at the structure of the mammalian skin, we see that the skin is being divided into two. We have epidermis and we have epidermis. These are the two major layers of the skin. And when we come to the epidermis is being divided into three. We have the malpighian layer, which is the innermost layer of the epidermis. We have the granular layer, which is the middle layer of the epidermis. We have the conified layer. Now, the first one, which is the conified layer, or we call it honey layer. This is the outermost layer of the skin. Within this area it is the outermost layer of the skin that is made up of dead and flat cells. It is made up of dead and flat cells. These cells are being made up of large deposits of keratin. The presence of keratin in these cells makes them to be tough and flexible, and also to be a waterproof-like structure because of the deposition of keratin in the conified layer. So the conified layer protects all the living cells beneath it. And apart from protecting all the living cells beneath it, it helps to reduce the rate of water loss from the body because of its waterproof-like structure. We see the second layer, which is the granular layer. The granular layer is the middle layer of the epidermis that is made up of round cells. These round cells have one thing in common, that they are constantly being replaced by the new cells that are being produced by the malpighian layer. The cells that you will see in the granular layer, they are constantly being replaced by the new cells that you will see in the malpighian layer. Malpighian layer has the ability to produce new cells. It consists of active dividing cells. So if these cells are being formed, they replace the cells in the granular layer. Now the malpighian layer or germinative layer, which is the innermost layer or the third layer of the epidermis. This layer, as I have said earlier, consists of active dividing cells that are dividing actively. These cells are pigmented. When we say that cells are pigmented, which means that those cells, they have pigments. These pigments are into two. We have two major pigments that we will see in the malpighian layer. And when we talk about the layer of the epidermis that are made up of pigments, that are pigmented, we say that it is the malpighian layer or the germinative layer. Malpighian layer, because of the presence of this pigment, that's where the name malpighian emanates from. The pigment that we are talking about here is the melanin and the keratin. These are the two pigments that are found in the malpighian layer. And when we talk about the melanin plays the role to give the skin its color. That is one. And also to absorb harmful ultraviolet rays that will harm the skin. So it tries to prevent the skin from injury by absorbing harmful ultraviolet rays. I have mentioned two things that the melanin does. One, that it gives the skin its color, and also that it absorbs ultraviolet rays that will possibly harm or cause injury to the skin. Now the second one, which is keratin. The second pigment, which is keratin. The keratin has the ability to provide the toughness and flexibility of the skin. It is a protein, compacted proteins, a deposition of large molecules of protein that are responsible for toughness and flexibility of the skin. Because of the functions of melanin, that's why if you see albinos, they lack melanin pigment in their skin. That's why if you see their skin color, it's quite different from a normal skin color because of the absence of melanin in their body. Look at the three layers of the epidermis. There is one thing that should be going in your mind. How do these layers of the epidermis obtain blood supply? How do they obtain blood supply? Because looking at it, we can't see any blood vessel from these particular layers. At the epidermis, there is no blood vessel. Simply, they have no blood supply of its own. Thereby, the mammalian cells here, how do they survive? Because this is the area that we see cells that will continue dividing. They are active dividing cells. So how do they survive? How do they get blood? How do they get nutrient for their metabolic activity? So these cells, they get their supply of blood, oxygen, nutrient by the diffusion that occurs from the blood in the dermis. If you see the capillaries of the blood capillaries of the dermis, the diffusion of these nutrients and blood moves over to the mammalian layer. The mammalian layer, through the process of obtaining blood and nutrient and oxygen from the diffusion process, they can be able to survive. So I want you, the emphasis I'm making here is that the epidermis has no blood supply of its own layer of the skin, which is the dermis. The dermis has one unique characteristic when it comes to the skin. The dermis is the layer of the skin that is made up of connective tissues. And these connective tissues, we'll look at them. We'll look at the different parts, different tissues that are found in the dermis. Let's start with the first one here, which is the blood capillaries. The blood capillaries, you know the function of blood vessels because a capillary is a blood vessel. So it has the ability to bring food and oxygen to the dermal cells. And not just about supplying and nutrients to the dermal cell, it also has the ability to remove their waste. Blood vessels can also play the role to serve to regulate body temperature because they allow blood to flow through them. So this is the blood vessel. After the blood vessel, let's look at the sweat gland. The sweat gland, they are found in the dermis. Look at them as they are coiled. See how they are coiled? They are made up of coiled bodies, coiled tubes, which continues coiling till they drop at the sweat ducts. Either we call it sweat duct or Sweatpaw. So they coil down the dermis till and elongate towards the epidermis, where they come out as a sweat duct or Sweatpaw. The Sweatpaw opens there at the surface of the skin. So if you look at this sweat duct that elongates from here towards this area, it tries to give the body ability to play two major functions. The sweat glands, it performs two major functions. One, it plays the function of excretion and the cooling of the body. How does this happen? The cells of the sweat gland absorb water. They are not just absorbing water only. They absorb water, mineral salt, and urea from the capillary network here. from this capillary network that you see here, they absorb these substances, water, mineral salt, and urea. So when they absorb them, they will then secrete them into the sweat ducts, which they can possibly send out of the body through the Sweatpaw. So this is through this process, they can be able to excrete some waste products. So apart from excreting some waste product, when sweat reaches the surface of the skin, it evaporates. Immediately sweat moves out here and it reaches the surface of the skin, it evaporates. And when it evaporates, what happens? It cools the body. Evaporation will leave the body with a low temperature. That's why whenever we run, after running, you see yourself sweating. Immediately you just sit down and stop sweating, this sweat will start evaporating. And as those sweat are evaporating, you see the body cooling as a result of that evaporation. So that's why we say that the sweat gland, it plays two roles. One, excretion, and two, cooling of the body. The next one here is the sensory nerves or receptors. Under this, we have the touch receptor, we have the temperature receptor, we also have the nerve fiber. These are the receptors that we'll see here. Now, what are the functions of the receptors? I think we have about four major sensory receptors that we will look at right now. These four major sensory receptors that are found in the dermis, what do? They receive stimuli. They are there to receive stimuli from the external environment. They will receive stimuli. We have the touch receptor here. We have the temperature receptor here. We have the pressure receptor. We have the pain receptor. So if you look at all these receptors, they are there to collect stimuli from the external environment. And when they collect this stimuli, what will happen? They will convert them to impulse. If they convert them to the impulse, they will send them the appropriate information to the brain, for the brain to interpret and send the necessary feedback for the body to react towards it. So we have the touch receptor that is responsible for the stimulus. We have the hair follicle. This is the hair follicle. The hair follicle is found in the deep pit. It's found in a deep pit. Look at it here. You see a deep pit formed by the unfolding of the Malpighian layer. Look at the Malpighian layer. You see how the Malpighian layer folds here? This deep pit is where the hair follicle dips itself into. And when this hair follicle keeps dividing continuously to produce a very long and slender hair. Either we say that it's slender or cylindrical hair. As the hair elongates, its keratin will start to deposit into them. And when keratin are being deposited into these hairs, then they will possibly die. That's the reason why we say that a hair is not a cell, because when hairs are formed, when they elongate, keratin becomes deposited into the hair, and the hair will die. Now we have another one, which is the sebaceous gland. The sebaceous gland is one of the parts of the dermis that originates from the epidermis. And the function of this gland is to secrete sebum. A sebum is an oily substance that is found in the hair follicle. It is found in the hair follicle. The function of this oily gland is to keep the skin waterproof and flexible. So it has the ability to supply the skin with flexibility, and as well keeps the skin out of dust and microorganisms. So that's the sebaceous gland. And the last but not the least is the one we call the adipose tissue. And the adipose tissue, or we call it subcutaneous fatty layer, it is the layer below the dermis. Below the dermis. This layer below the dermis It's a layer of connective tissue that it contains variable numbers of fat cells. That's why we call it subcutaneous fatty tissue or adipose tissue. So it contains variable number of fat cells. So, and as well as that, it acts as a long-term food storage. Fats are being stored at this particular layer of the skin. So when we can see fat here, this particular part of the skin also play the role of insulating the layers, thereby preventing heat loss. Because we know that one of the major functions of fat is what? Insulation. So when we have fat being stored in this layer of the skin, they will play the role of preventing heat loss from the body. These are the different parts of the skin, the different layers of the skin, and different things that are found there. We have looked at the sensory receptors, the nerve fiber, the temperature receptor, the touch receptor, the pain receptor. We have looked at all of them. We have looked at the sweat duct, the blood capillaries, the sebaceous gland, the erector muscles, which is there for controlling of the erection, the movement of the hairs, erect or it will come down, based on the control of the nerve fibers. So when these impulses are being taken, whether the temperature is high, if the thermoreceptors collect information, if they send to the brain will possibly give back a reaction to determine what the receptor muscles will do. If the receptor muscle will draw the Sweatpaws, or they will open the Sweatpaws. Having known this, let's move into the next objective, which is the functions of the skin. First one, we have protection. The conified layer or honey layer of the epidermis that is made up of keratin plays the role of covering or waterproofing the living cells below it. I have said that earlier. It also protects the skin from damage and bacterial invasion. The waterproof nature of the skin prevents the skin from water loss. Excess water loss from the body due to evaporation. So this waterproof body prevents the skin from that. It makes the skin to be impermeable to water through osmosis when we get wet or immersed in water. That's the reason that because of this conified layer that is made up of these flat dead cells, water cannot move from a river and enter into our skin. The skin is being protected, it's being waterproofed. The next one, we have excretion. Skin is used for the removal of waste products in the form of sweat, example urea. So we have that as an excretory organ. It helps also in excretion. Now we have production of vitamin D. The skin makes use of the infrared rays that occur during the midday morning sunlight to manufacture vitamin D. It has the ability to make use of those infrared rays to manufacture vitamin D. Now, the sensitivity is another function of the skin. The skin has sensory receptors, both that of pain, touch, pressure, even the one of heat and cold, temperature. So the skin makes use of it to determine the changes that occurs in the environment, to be sensitive over things that occurs within the environment and respond to them accordingly. We also have the subcutaneous layer that stores fat. So the subcutaneous layer stores fat and also provides the body with heat, thereby acting as an insulator. The next one, it maintains a constant amount of water in the body. When the body has excess water, some of it will get rid as sweat, whereby skin will release that. But when the body has limited quantity of water, less sweat will be produced, but the body will not be dehydrated because the skin will control the amount of water that will leave the body. So the skin has the ability to maintain the amount of water that will leave and the amount of water that will be retained. We have another major function of the skin, which is temperature regulation. How does this happen? Mammals can regulate the amount or the rate of temperature by two processes that we call vasodilation, and vasoconstriction. We know that mammals, they are warm-blooded animals, or we say that they are homeothermic. That means that they have a constant body temperature of 37 degrees centigrade. They have the ability to regulate their own body temperature, irrespective of the temperature of the environment or of their surrounding. They have the ability to put their body to a constant temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. So when the animal is hot, what happens? There is excess heat in the body. That's what it implies. Blood will flow into the dermal layers of the skin. It will flow through the dermal capillaries. When this blood flows into the dermal capillaries of the skin, it stimulates the blood vessels in the skin to dilate. What do we mean to dilate? Dilate simply means to enlarge, to make something bigger. So when these blood vessels dilate, this process of dilating, of the blood vessels dilating, is what we call vasodilation. That time when the animal is hot, there is excess heat in the body, blood will flow into the dermal capillaries, which will stimulate the blood vessels in the skin to dilate. The process of these blood vessels of the skin to dilate is what we call vasodilation. Now, when this happens, this brings more blood to the surface to enhance heat loss by convection and radiation. It brings more blood to the surface of the skin to enhance heat loss by convection and radiation. You see that during this time we have more blood towards the surface of the skin. Heat will leave the body through convection and radiation. The sweat glands extract large quantities of sweat from the body, from the blood at this moment. So the heat of vaporization will help the sweat to evaporate. And when the sweat evaporates through the sweat pores, it cools the body and lowers the body temperature. That is how the body maintains hot temperature when the temperature is too high in the internal environment. Now, when the animal is cold, what happens? The second process occurs, that we call vasoconstriction. When the animal is cold, the blood vessels in the skin will constrict. They won't dilate this time. They will constrict. And the constriction of these blood vessels of the skin is what we call vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction will cause the blood to flow less in the surface of the skin. Thereby, you see little sweat being produced. Through this process, less heat will be released by convection and radiation. We won't have large amount of heat leaving the body through convection and radiation. The erector muscles in the dermis also help to contract, making the hair shaft and to stand and erect. We remember that we have erector muscles. We have them there that will always contract and relax, thereby controlling the movement of the hair follicles. So those shafts, it controls them. It helps them to insulate, thereby using that process to insulate the body. We have a layer also that helps to control heat. The subcutaneous layer, the fat layer, the adipose tissues in the skin acts as an insulator, thereby preventing heat loss too. So with this, we can be able to see how the body tries as much as possible to maintain its constant temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. Remember that the two processes are vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Vasodilation is the enlargement of the blood capillaries of the skin. While vasoconstriction is the constriction or the relaxation, whereby the blood vessel will become smaller. Much blood will not flow through them. They won't be that large again. They will not constrict. They will constrict, thereby bring less blood to the surface of the body or of the skin. Thereby, through that process, they will reduce the amount of sweat. And we'll stop here today in our lesson. In our lesson, you have your activities that I encourage you to pay more attention so that we can achieve our stated objective very, very well. Thank you.